anything we do in this country related to transactions, related to housing, or anything in our personal lives, someone is running a background check on us.
The issue, I think, is that most people don't know that there's any kind of resolution. So most people just kind of go, I guess I was denied. Nothing I can do about that. And it usually isn't true.
The reality is that 9 times out of 10, the credit reporting agencies aren't going to make the correction.
I mean, I do think education, as we've already kind of said a couple times today, is the biggest issue. Most people don't know that there's a solution for them.
Something as silly as a $98 debt collection that you don't owe can be the basis of a lawsuit. Like, you can't do that to people. You can't bully people, you can't harass people, and you can't harm their financial security and their families over $98. Hey, Kendra, as you know, I'm David Chami. I'm the managing partner for Consumer Justice Law Firm, and I wanted to thank you for joining me for our first ever episode of Consumed by Justice. Kendra, for those of you who don't know Kendra, is my managing attorney for our intake team. She's been with me for 7 years and primarily is the person responsible for deciding which cases ever get retained, the cases we take on. So Kendra, I asked you to sit in on this with me because I thought you'd be the best person at the law firm, the person I've probably worked with the longest at this point in consumer protection, to kind of help explain sort of what it is that we do here. And, you know, as you know, when I started out as a lawyer, I didn't even know what consumer protection was, didn't even know it was a thing, had never even heard of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, did not understand that I had rights as a consumer, much less that I could make a living literally having a law firm that does nothing but represent consumers. And so there's a kind of a difference between the two of us, is I kind of fell into this, sort of found it by accident, and learned about the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And when I started, I only knew about TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian, and the credit information they reported to people. And I thought that that's what the Fair Credit Reporting Act was supposed to do, because it says Fair Credit Reporting Act. But then as the years went on, I learned that it covered so much more, right? It covered background checks for employment. It covers background checks for housing. So when you're applying for an apartment, car insurance, housing insurance, renter's insurance, and even opening up a checking account. It's almost like anything we do in this country related to transactions, related to housing, or anything in our personal lives, someone is running a background check on us. And so, learning that, it has sort of changed the way I perceive sort of the importance of what we do. And I thought it was interesting and I asked you to come in here and talk about it because, number one, I want to educate as many consumers as we can. Hopefully people will see this, but more so to get your perspective, because since you've been working for me now almost 7 years, you've been kind of my managing attorney on the front lines, kind of going over and evaluating consumer complaints, the cases, and kind of figuring out what happened and how to fix it. So you've got really a better handle on what people are calling in and complaining about even than I do. So you could just tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about sort of what that's like.
Right. So like you said, I mean, everything we do now, everything you apply for typically involves some kind of background check, some kind of consumer report, which could be a credit report or a criminal background check or something like that. People get denied all the time, and they don't realize or even really care to look at why they were denied. And so they usually end up with us when they are denied for something important enough for them to say, oh crap, I've got to fix this now. And that's something like their housing application is denied. Now they don't have anywhere to live. Maybe their job application was denied because of an inaccurate background report. They don't have any way to feed their kids. People are calling us all the time for just inaccurate criminal records in general, maybe records that never belonged to them, or maybe records that were reduced or changed in some way and are reporting as the original charge.
But you said something just now that I didn't really even think about. I thought about it before, but that they only call when it's like super important, right? But there's a way. I mean, they get some kind of notice, right? That something was that they were denied for some reason that should tell them what to do.
Absolutely. Everybody does. You get a notice, you get a written denial. The issue, I think, in my experience, is that most people don't know that there's any kind of resolution. There's nowhere for them to really go when those denials happen. So most people just kind of go, I guess I was denied. Nothing I can do about that. And it usually isn't true. So we always recommend that people are looking at the denials. They're reaching out to us to inquire about why they may have been denied. We can always help people request reports to see if any of the information that was considered was inaccurate. Because if it was, they're entitled to recover damages for those kinds of things.
So when you get denied, what is it specifically? I mean, are they getting a letter in the mail? Are they getting an email? Is it different? I mean, what have you been seeing?
So it varies. Most credit applications, if you're applying for a credit card or a loan, maybe, most of those will be written. They're supposed to be written. You're supposed to get them in what is called an adverse action notice. That can come via email, it can come via mail, but it's supposed to be in written form. The same goes for employment denials based on background reports. Those are supposed to be written as well. But sometimes housing denials will come verbally.
Yeah, no. So tell me this because I'm not the one on the phones with these clients when they call in. I have to imagine a lot of them are distressed, like
Absolutely.
emotional, not really, in a panic. So how do you deal with, kind of getting them to a place where you can actually have a conversation and figure out what you need?
Yeah, so it's really just important to me and to all of my staff that as soon as somebody calls, that they feel like we are here to help them. We know what's happening. We have the resources to help them. We usually start by walking through a timeline of kind of what's gone on up until that point, so we can understand what the consumer has applied for, what they think has happened, what they think could have caused denial or any other kind of adverse action. And then we try to help them either obtain or request the documents that we need to make that kind of assessment. Most of the time, the most important document is going to be the report itself, the consumer report itself.
So how do they get that? I mean, you said something about requesting the report. I mean, you say we help them. How do we help them? What exactly?
So it depends on, again, the kind of application we're talking about. If we're talking about a credit denial, credit-related denial, maybe they got denied for a mortgage. We would help them most often by helping them navigate the annualcreditreport.com website to pull their Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion reports so we could review those for any kind of inaccurate information.
So I know with consumer protection, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, generally the attorney's fees are paid by the credit reporting agency or the people that have caused the harm. But how often do you see that as being one of the issues that makes people hesitant to call us, or even when they've decided to call us, afraid to sign an agreement or a retainer to hire us?
All the time. Most people, especially people who have seen denials and maybe didn't do something about it before, the primary reason for them doing that was because they didn't think they could afford to get any help. Either they didn't know they could get help or they thought they couldn't pay for it. But the Fair Credit Reporting Act has a fee shifting provision, which means that the defendants are going to be required to pay their attorney's fees and costs. So our firm doesn't take anything up front or out of pocket from anybody. We only get paid when we win.
Yeah, I mean, I think most law firms that do what we do don't charge up front. And so I've had clients call and say, oh, well, I know, another lawyer or local attorney who says they can help me and that, that they will ultimately, think that what we're doing can be done on a local level. Our firm has offices all over the country, so most firms don't have that. But at least in my experience, a lot of times when you're dealing with a lawyer that doesn't specialize in consumer protection and specifically credit reporting litigation, they can't even comprehend sort of, well, how are we going to get paid? Your damages are so low. Like, I think this is one of the important things, right? Is you've been denied a credit card, and it says, sometimes the notice will say something like, because of uh, bankruptcy.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, well, I never filed bankruptcy. So you don't understand what to do. And then they call, and we've had some cases like this where the consumer calls and says, well, I've never had a bankruptcy. I don't know why they denied me. And we help them get a copy of the report. And then they're trying to figure out, well, how is this worth it, right, for you as a law firm? What are my damages? I got denied a credit card. I didn't lose any money. And sometimes that's the case, right, that they didn't lose any money, but the goal is to make sure that we fix the issue, to make sure that the credit reporting agencies don't make that mistake again in the future. And so what is a typical, what does a typical case like that end up looking like for a consumer as far as, well, what do they get out of it, right?
Right. So ultimately, our primary goal is always to make sure the report is fixed, and it's fixed as permanently as we can hope it to be. But beyond that, a consumer can recover financial damages associated with emotional distress, humiliation, embarrassment, frustration, wasted time. All of those things can be kind of lumped in with what we call actual provable damages. A consumer with an issue like that, to me, what you described, a bankruptcy showing up on your credit report that doesn't belong to you, usually indicates that they're dealing with some kind of mixed file issue, meaning their information is being confused with somebody else's. It's being added, somebody else's information is being added to their credit report. So a consumer like that, most of the time would walk away from a case with us for somewhere between $7,000 and $12,000. But it's not uncommon to be more like 15,000 or something higher.
And I think the biggest issue is you're dealing with a mixed file, right? In those cases. And so the consumer comes to us thinking, how do I fix this? Not realizing that simple credit card denial, we can fix it. We're not going to charge them anything out of pocket. All of our fees and all of our time will be compensated by the settlement, or we have to, a judgment, we have to go all the way. But that they're also going to end up receiving thousands of dollars to themselves, right, to their own pockets. The scenario we just described sometimes isn't necessarily a mixed file, though. It can be like, I had a cosigner on the account, and my cosigner filed bankruptcy. So they have a personal bankruptcy, but I don't, and I'm still paying on the credit card. And so, yes, sometimes the banks or the credit reporting agencies will just confuse those similarities because the account is associated with a bankruptcy as it relates to one person. They automatically say, assume that also belongs to the other person. So, yeah, I mean, anyway, so that's a simple example. What other kinds of why don't you tell us a little bit about identity theft? Because I feel like that's a problem everybody is at risk of. I mean, we're so afraid to share our information because it's like that, and somebody's now using your information and charging up credit cards or opening up credit cards or car loans or house loans even. What kind of things have you seen?
Right. So identity theft is a pervasive issue. It impacts probably an uncalculable.
Why'd you say pervasive?
So
We're talking technical here. I just want to know what you think.
So everybody's at risk for becoming a victim of identity theft. There are certain categories of groups of people that may be at higher risk for identity theft. In particular, folks who maybe English isn't their first language, so they have to entrust other people to help them with applications or translate for them when they need to apply for a home or do those things. And unfortunately, sometimes that puts their information in a space it wouldn't have otherwise been. So a lot of immigrant communities can be particularly susceptible to identity theft.
Do you remember that case? I think the case, I want to say it was the Gonzalez case that we just had,
Yep.
where the client went into the car dealer, the dealership, filled out an application, bought a car, and then went home, and then her boyfriend went back to the same salesperson, got his own car, but then used all of his girlfriend's information to be a co-signer because he couldn't get the car on his own. So the my understanding is the dealer, that there's an active fraud investigation, right? So the dealer was in on it, the boyfriend was in on it, but the girlfriend, whose data was used, whose information was used to get the car, um, she doesn't find out until he misses a payment, that her name is even on the loan, because they call her to try to collect. And so she calls up and says, "What are you talking about? I never co-signed for this." And they said, "Well, we have all of your information." So she starts putting two and two together, and she's like, "Wait a minute. The salesman and my boyfriend just added me to this loan without my permission." Now, of course, they've broken up,
Right.
right? They've broken up, and the boyfriend's out of the picture, but he still has the car, and now he stops paying on the car, and she's being chased down for payments. On top of that, they're reporting negatively on her credit report. So that's a form of identity theft that isn't that uncommon, right? Where
Right.
someone, a family member or a friend, takes your information and then uses it to open up their own credit or to get you to be a cosigner without your knowledge. And look, unfortunately, and I hate to bash used car lots, right? But these people who are salespeople who make money in commissions when they sell things, um, I'm not saying the guy was in on it, right? The sales guy may not have been in on it, but he definitely knew the girlfriend wasn't there to
Right.
sign, right? He just trusted the boyfriend had permission. But sometimes, and I've seen other cases where the dealer, salesperson at the dealership's actually in on it,
Right.
using the information from people. So it's not uncommon that the people at the dealership or the mortgage company or the credit card company even could take your information and use it to commit fraud.
Right. It does happen. And to your point about kind of the relationship aspect, it is very, very common, unfortunately, for people to get their identity stolen or their information misused by somebody they know, whether that be a partner, whether that be a parent, maybe it's a sibling, somebody that at some point you were close with, maybe even lived in the same house with, so they had access to your information, and then they misused it. Unfortunately, a lot of times people don't realize until the account has become negative or derogatory. Somebody's fallen behind on that account, and now you're getting collection phone calls. Or maybe you have some kind of credit monitoring service like Credit Karma, and you got an alert that now there's a late notation on your reports, but you pay your bills, so you're like, what the heck is that? Then you go look and you see this auto loan that you don't have. You've already paid off your car, so be it. But it's pretty common for that person to have stolen your identity in close proximity to you.
What I actually had happen in a case is, um, an identity thief was trying to open an account in our client's name, but he got our client's information through a data breach at Experian.
Right.
So he didn't steal it from our client. Our client wasn't lazy or negligent, didn't do anything wrong, didn't leave his wallet out. They actually hacked into Experian's website,
Right.
into the Experian servers, and got our client's information. And the reason we found that out is because Experian had actually mixed information from two different consumers. So it was one of those mixed files that you talked about earlier. Took that mixed file information and he tried to use that mixed file information to open up an account. And when he did that, it got denied because the information was mixed. He was using
Right.
information from one consumer and another. But that's how our client ended up finding out, is he got an alert that said that an application had been processed in his name. And that's the other thing I think that's very important, is looking out for those alerts and looking at your credit reports every so often to look to see if there are any inquiries on your credit file. Because an inquiry, there are different kinds of inquiries, and they'll tell you what kind they are on the report itself, but there are inquiries for new credit. And so if you see that there's an inquiry on your credit report, you're like, well, I never applied for credit with that company. That's usually an indication that your information may have been stolen and someone's trying to open credit in your name.
Right. So it's a good idea to keep an eye on those things. A lot of times, too, people will get an alert that says that an application was submitted, but it was denied. And some people are like, oh, well, it was denied, I'll just let it go. But we really advise that you keep an eye on it moving forward. And even if there's only the inquiry, say the application was denied, so no account was ever open, meaning that no account is now being reported to your credit reports. That inquiry is still the product of fraud or identity theft, and you're still entitled to dispute it. And hard inquiries, although they don't have an insane impact on your credit score or they're not a huge factor in all kinds of credit applications, it is still harmful to you to have a hard inquiry on your credit reports that you weren't associated with and you didn't authorize.
So again, I think the question really is, how often do you take a client on with nothing out of pocket for them, where the only issue is there were inquiries on their credit reports that they did not make? Is that a case you would take?
Yeah, it is a case we would take. Most of the time, it's going to require a police report or an FTC identity theft report. And then once we've got those items filed, which we will help you do, we draft disputes, submit them to the credit reporting agencies that are reporting those kinds of inquiries, and then we wait for the dispute responses. If the credit reporting agencies fail to correct the reports or delete the inquiry in this situation, that's the only way to correct it. At that point, we would move forward.
So something that I think that's very important, right? I know what we do here, so I'm going to clarify. So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, someone's trying to open credit, it was denied, they weren't able to do it, but they tried, and we would help them file a report with the FTC. That's something that we can do online, right?
Right.
And so we will help them file the report online. We will help them prepare disputes and send them to the credit bureaus, right?
Right.
Okay, so assuming we do those two things and it gets corrected, how do we get paid?
We wouldn't in that circumstance. It's a risk that we take.
Okay, so I just wanted to be clear, right? So we will help the consumer, and if it gets fixed, then we don't get paid, and we are happy to help the consumer.
Yep, we just part ways.
If it doesn't get fixed, then we will help the consumer by going after the bureau for not removing the fraudulent inquiries from their credit reports, right?
Correct.
And so I think it's important because people sometimes think, well, why would you do all this? Well, the reality is, I know that 9 times out of 10, maybe 9.9 times out of 10, the credit reporting agencies aren't going to make the correction.
Right.
And I saw a crazy statistic literally yesterday that since the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been gutted, basically since, we're not getting political here, but since Trump took office, he's done a lot to undermine the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which was intended to serve as a government sort of watchdog against banks and financial institutions and credit reporting agencies. I saw a crazy statistic that since he's taken away funding from the CFPB, disputes or complaints that would come into the CFPB, Experian, for example, when complaints would come in, 20% of all complaints to the CFPB resulted in a correction, meaning the consumer would get the issue fixed by just complaining to the CFPB. That number, as of like last week, is less than 1% of complaints result in the consumer getting their issue fixed. So it's almost as if Experian has gotten away with keeping inaccurate information on reports, right? Because there's no way you can go from fixing 20% to fixing less than 1%, because the complaints didn't go from being valid to invalid, right? So I think the importance of having that watchdog, the CFPB, is just lost on so many people, consumers and politicians. But that just really emphasizes, I think, the importance of private lawyers that do what we do, because we do it and we make them pay, right? The CFPB would just tell them to fix it. They would fix it and they'd go on their way. There was no consequences. I guess if you could just share some other experiences or things that you may come across that are cases that you help people with.
Yeah, so I mean, we help consumers in a variety of situations. We kind of talked about some of them already, which is anytime there's an inaccurate credit report, when they've been a victim of identity theft.
But can you give me some examples? Like, okay, what's an inaccurate credit report look like? What is a typical kind of case that would come through your door that you'd say, okay, yeah, I see the inaccuracy here. Let's help them dispute it and sue if they don't fix it.
Yeah, so we pretty frequently will see consumers who maybe have settled a debt or paid off an account, and that account continues to be reported with a balance and maybe even late payment notifications or something like that after the account was paid off. So we pretty frequently help consumers dispute that information to make sure the balance is updated, they're not being reported, or their credit reports don't indicate that they owe more debt than they do. We do also see a lot of issues, especially now since COVID, with people having their student loans be reported inaccurately, loans that were in deferment that dropped out of deferment, or maybe loans that switched servicers. And when the servicers
What does that mean?
changed,
What does that mean? Loans were in deferment.
so consumers weren't required to pay their student loans for X amount of time. Their loans were deferred either because of some kind of COVID relief or because they applied for a deferment. But because the loan servicers have changed a lot since COVID, there's just been a lot of moving parts with the Department of Education. Um, a lot of those loans are now being reported with inaccurate payment history, or I'm sorry, negative payment history that's inaccurate. If your loan was in deferment, you weren't required to make a payment. So if you weren't required to make a payment, it can't be true that you were late.
Yeah. So I just remembered one of our cases, which I think like I just want to talk about this case because I think like this is a kind of problem, the kind of problem that people will run into. We had a client that switched their phone carrier.
Hmm.
They went from like T-Mobile to AT&T, and when they did that, they canceled their contract or they canceled their service, and they owed some money,
Hmm.
or at least T-Mobile said they owed some money. Um, and so like 6 months after he was with AT&T, T-Mobile's calling him trying to collect, and he goes, I don't owe you this money, and they ultimately agreed, look, pay us $100. It was like a $200 bill. He was just pay us $100 and we'll call it a day.
Right.
And so he paid them the $100. And then like 6 months later, a debt collector starts trying to collect the $100 difference, right? So they're trying to get the extra, I think it was like $98. And he tells the debt collector, no, I don't owe this. I made it, I paid 100. We settled it with T-Mobile directly. And then they kept pursuing it. And then they reported it on his credit report. So we filed a lawsuit against, we helped him dispute it. And then we filed a lawsuit against T-Mobile and the debt collector. So check this out. While we're in litigation, we're in a lawsuit, the debt collector stops collecting and sends it back to T-Mobile and says, hey, we're being sued. We're not collecting on this anymore.
Right.
So while we're in the lawsuit against the debt collector and T-Mobile, T-Mobile sends that debt, that $98 debt, to another debt collector that starts calling our client to collect the $98. By the way, we settled with the credit bureau in that case for tens of thousands of dollars, like attorney's fees and costs and damages for the client. So while we're in a lawsuit where they've already paid, one of the defendants had already paid like tens of thousands of dollars over a $98 bill. Right. But it's not and this is what sometimes judges don't understand. It's not the $98 bill, right? It's the effect of reporting a collection on someone's credit report.
Right.
It literally dropped his credit score like 120 points. His interest rates on his credit cards went up. One of his credit cards actually reduced his credit line. So he had like a $5,000 credit line that went down to 1,000.
Right.
So he no longer basically, and he owed like 1,000. So he had no more credit available on that credit card. So something as silly as a $98 debt collection that you don't owe can be the basis of a lawsuit.
Right.
Not only to protect you from the negative credit harm, but also to teach them a lesson. Like, you can't do that to people. You can't bully people. You can't harass people, and you can't harm their financial security and their families over $98. Like, I don't even know how that's a thing, and how it's such a negative has such a negative effect on someone's credit because they had a disagreement over $98. But it really does matter, and I guess I can't think of anything else, but I'm sure you can. Examples like auto payments or something like that. I mean, where you've seen clients call in, like an example, if someone's dealing with an issue um, where they make their payments, but somehow they're being reported as late. Any examples you can help us with?
Yeah, so we see it pretty frequently with auto leases. People will return a leased vehicle. The dealership, they have a conversation there and they say, "Do I owe you any money?" Dealership says, "Nope. If you do, we'll send you a bill." The bill never comes. So it's months and months and months later, and suddenly there's this trade line or an account on their credit reports showing up as a collection saying they never paid BMW $600 for this lease. There was some kind of overage that nobody talked about. And at that point, the consumer didn't even have an opportunity to pay the dealership. They asked if they owed them any money. The dealership said no. So they assumed they didn't owe them any money. They walked away. They're not checking. They're not calling back to say, "Hey, are you sure I still don't owe you any money?" Like, that's, nobody behaves that way.
Right.
And it's really bad record keeping, accounting on the part of the dealership. But that collection account shows up and suddenly it's impacting the consumer in a major way, especially if there's somebody who does more routinely pay their bills. Like, one collection account, like you said, can tank your credit score. And maybe that doesn't always matter immediately to each individual consumer, but you never know when you're going to need to use your credit again. So it's important that when you do see those things, we fix them as quickly as we can.
How about people who have like, so I've had a few clients that I can recall that have like, they work for a government contractor or they work for the government and they have like security clearance, right? Is that a complaint you've heard before? Like, I can't even have a collection account on my credit report and that could cost me my job?
Yeah, there's a good number of our clients who've had that experience. Like you mentioned, most of the time it's people who need some kind of security clearance, and those kinds of employees, usually government employees, do have their credit reports reviewed as part of their job eligibility. So it's not just like, my credit score is not so good. They could lose their security clearance and then in turn lose their job very quickly because of inaccurate information.
So I've had people, when I tell them, that this happens to our clients, and they're like, "Well, why? Who cares? It's a couple $100 collection account." And I try to explain to them that when you work for the government and you have access to confidential or secret information, the government doesn't want people having access to secret information who owe money, who are in collections. Because what they worry about is if you're in financial trouble, you might be willing to take a bribe, right? Maybe you'll sell classified information for cash because you're in financial trouble. And so that's why I always tell clients, I'm like, if you're in legitimate financial trouble, not fraud or identity theft, you really do owe money and you are working for the government and you have security clearance issues, that you really should be consulting with an attorney about possibly looking at bankruptcy, because one of the ways you can, solve your financial trouble is to wipe out your debt in a bankruptcy, and that's one way to protect your job. But oftentimes it's not just, "Oh, I'm in financial trouble." It's, "I don't owe this,
Right.
and I didn't owe it, or it's not mine." And those are the worst, because you're like, now you're even in more of a pinch, right, to decide, what do I do? Because not only are you ruining my credit, but you're putting my job at risk. And so I think it's important that if you are in one of those positions, that before you make a decision about paying, that you consult with an attorney, because most bankruptcy attorneys, and I know most lawyers that do what I do, our firm doesn't charge a fee for consultation.
Right.
So if you were to call up our law firm, for example, and say, "Hey, Kendra, here's what I'm dealing with," you're not saying, "What's your credit card," right? Or send me a check, or send me a Zelle or a Venmo. It's, "All right, tell me what you got going on, and let me see if I can help you or not. And if we can't help them, Sometimes you can refer them to
Right.
someone else, right? Because that's the thing that I know I've done is for those clients who don't have a consumer protection issue that we can help
Mm-hmm.
with, I've connected them with like, here's a consultation with a bankruptcy attorney that I can recommend you to.
Right.
And they can at least tell you whether bankruptcy makes sense. It doesn't always make sense for you. Sometimes the debts are small and you can just pay them or enter into a repayment plan, because that's the other thing. You could be in debt, but if the government comes to you and says, hey, you're in debt, what's going on? We just saw your credit. You can say, no, 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 I've entered into a repayment agreement with this creditor.
Yeah.
And you can show them that you're on a repayment plan, and that will usually fix the problem. But this is where having a lawyer to talk to is going to be very helpful.
Right.
So, how many calls a day do you get? Just curious, because I don't sit in your office, and I know you're busy. But how many calls?
So me as an individual, probably somewhere between 5 and 10. Us as a firm, somewhere between 60 and 100, usually
Every day?
every day. We have a staff that's prepared to answer those calls. We have a big intake staff for that reason. We want to make sure we can help people when they need the help. Our goal is to be available as quickly as we can. Some of these things do take a little bit of time to gather documents and information, but our goal is always to give you an answer as quickly as we can.
And let's just say a client or a consumer calls, and we decide that they have a case, and we send them a contract and they sign it. What is a typical? I know it's not always the same, but what is a typical turnaround time from the time you have them sign a contract to when an attorney is assigned and a lawsuit is filed?
So in most circumstances, between the date of signing that contract and us assigning you to a litigation attorney, which is the other half of our firm, I'm our intake attorney, should only take a couple of days. Depends on the complexity of your case. Sometimes it takes longer, but the goal is to do it as quickly as possible, because most of the time these issues need to be corrected as quickly as possible. Once you're assigned to an attorney, our firm has an internal policy to get a complaint drafted and ready for your review within 2 weeks. At that point, you just have to review it, and as soon as you okay it, it'll get filed. So usually we're looking at somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks, but if there's an emergency, we can also do our best to prioritize it and move things much faster if we need to.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that people will come to me and say, well, shouldn't I just call Experian or shouldn't I just call Equifax? Sometimes the answer is we should definitely send a dispute.
Mm-hmm.
I don't usually recommend calling. I like to send a letter because I want proof,
Right.
because I don't trust them to save the recordings of those calls. And when you call them, you're just giving them your verbal sort of account of what happened. And then you're hoping that they're keeping good records and notes. And a lot of times people will say, well, you can get the recording. And they'd be surprised how many times they'll be like, oh, what recording? It doesn't exist. We didn't save it. Or we don't know what happened. We don't know why we can't find it. So I always tell people we like to write the letters because I want written proof, keep a copy of it. We send it to them by certified mail because I want proof that they got it. But they'll say, well, why can't we just do it faster? Isn't it faster to call? And sure, sometimes it's faster to call. But my goal is to protect you, right? And sometimes when you come to us, we realize, hey, this is already a case.
Right.
And we can decide to send a written dispute to see if they'll fix it, or we can just file the lawsuit now. Because sometimes that's an option. And I always tell people, when you sue Experian or Equifax or TransUnion or any of these consumer reporting agencies, that is a dispute.
Yeah.
Right? I'm telling you, you've harmed me by doing these certain things, and I'm giving you a lawsuit. And so many times these bureaus don't do anything. Like they just let the mistake stay on your report, which is, of course, another claim. Then I'm like, okay, so now you've gotten a lawsuit filed, yet you still haven't made the corrections, which to me is just more evidence of damages and bad faith on the part of the agency. So, tell us, I guess, what is your typical day? I mean, what does a typical day look like? I mean, how many people are you retaining? I mean, how many people are hiring you every day?
Yeah, so it varies, right, depending on what day we're talking about, but we're usually looking at least 1, 2, maybe up to 5 a day. There's a lot of people with inaccurate consumer reports. It's like far more prevalent than I think anybody really realizes.
So I read a study, right? I read a study by the CFPB when they still had money,
Hmm.
um, that they conducted that said 23% of all consumer reports have a material inaccuracy. That means
Hmm.
something that is wrong on that report that can and likely will cause you harm. And so people are like, oh, 23%, is that a lot? And I say, well, I want you to think about how many times a consumer report is generated, right? There are probably right around 250 million people in the United States that have
Hmm.
a consumer report, like a file about them, just credit. We're just
Right.
talking about credit. Um, and there are three of them. There's more than three, but the three big
Hmm.
ones. So that means there are 750 million consumer reports, credit files. And that's just for credit. And every time you apply for a credit card or a loan of any kind or a checking account, someone is running a consumer report about you. So
Yeah.
now they're creating another report. So um, there are hundreds of millions of consumer reports being generated, just credit reports.
Yeah.
Now, job applications, housing applications, all of those are also consumer reports. They're not credit reports. Sometimes they include credit
Hmm.
as part of it, but usually it's a background check. So those are included in that 23% sort of inaccuracies. So, every Uber driver, every Lyft driver, and some of these people have multiple
Hmm.
platforms they're working on. So if you're driving for Uber, you're also driving for Lyft. You might also be driving for DoorDash, um, to supplement your income. You might have one person who has 10 consumer reports generated about them every year or
Right.
more. So I started doing the math. We're probably talking about 2 billion consumer reports that are generated every year.
Hmm.
If you do the math and just say conservatively, let's just say conservatively, not 23%, not 15%, but just 10%
Hmm.
of those reports have a material inaccuracy. That's 200 million consumer reports that a lawsuit potentially could have been filed
Hmm.
against the consumer reporting agency that generated that report. 200 million. Now, I like statistics, so I'm going to tell you another cool statistic. Under the Fair Credit Reporting Act, I think last year there were about 12,000 lawsuits filed in the
Hmm.
whole country out of a potential 200 million lawsuits that could have been filed.
Hmm.
So that's, I guess that goes to show you how little education there is
Yeah.
on consumer rights in this space. So I guess that's really what I'm hoping that this conversation has, that this series that we're going to start has, like people can come here and even ask questions, in the
Yeah.
comments about background reports, credit reports. I really just want to be a place that people can come, especially because I know there's so many credit repair
Hmm.
companies out there who tell you they're going to fix your credit, and the truth is they can't. They use gimmicks.
Yeah.
Sometimes those gimmicks work to get stuff off of a credit report, but oftentimes that stuff comes back.
Yeah.
Um, and so there are a lot of people out there who are going to try to get you to pay money out of your pocket, and they're not even lawyers, right? To get you to pay money to help you fix your credit, um, when they can't.
Right.
The law doesn't offer you any protection for the work that they're doing, meaning, if there's a gimmick reason for getting something off your credit report, you're not going to be protected for real when it doesn't come off. And so you're almost always better off calling a consumer protection lawyer who
Hmm.
does credit reporting litigation, before you call anyone else. It's not going to cost you anything to have that conversation. And if credit repair is an option that you should be considering, they're going to tell you. Say, look, we can't help you because you actually owe all of these
Right.
debts. Maybe you can try that. But you really want to find a reputable credit repair company. You're going to go down that route. So I'm hoping that this podcast series will offer useful information to people about their rights, opportunity to maybe have call in, talk to us.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you might be someone who can offer a lot of insight to people who don't know what to do next.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I do think education, as we've already kind of said a couple times today, is the biggest issue. Most people don't know that there's a solution for them. Most people don't know that they have rights to fix the reports. Most people don't even know that they should be looking at their reports. Your credit reports, I do think you should be reviewing pretty regularly. There's lots of ways to do that. You can get them for free on annualcreditreport.com. You can also sign up for a credit monitoring service like Credit Karma. You can see it on your phone. But also with background checks for employment and for housing. Anytime you're authorizing a background check, you should be making note of when you authorized it, which background check company that employer or housing entity is using, and then make sure you keep those documents so that if things go sideways, we have something to look at and figure out exactly what happened to you, and get it corrected as quickly as possible.
So you've said it a couple times, credit monitoring service.
Mhm.
You referenced Credit Karma. I know Credit Karma is going to give you Equifax, TransUnion.
Right.
It's not going to give you Experian. And I think it's important to let people understand Experian has their own app. It's
Mhm.
not even really Experian. It's another company that they're affiliated with
Mhm.
called CreditWorks, right? So this third-party company, which fronts as an Experian website, Experian.com,
Mhm.
they will give you, they've got like their own little unique platform that'll only give you Experian. But what you don't realize when you sign up for that platform, and this is why I always tell people, do not sign up
Right.
with Experian's credit monitoring. They are not only selling your data, which is fine. I guess everybody's selling your data to some degree. And I don't mean to suggest that it's fine, just that, if you want credit monitoring, I guess you're going to give up something.
Mhm.
They call it free, but you're giving them access to your data to market to you. But what Experian does I think is worse and very, I think, really just abhorrent. I think it's horrible that they are forcing people
Yeah.
without even really disclosing it to give up their rights to ever sue them down the road when they make a mistake. You end
Mhm.
up having to go to arbitration, which is a horrible remedy for you once you've been hurt by Experian for inaccurate credit reporting. So there are other ways to get access to your Experian reports. And do you have any suggestions for people if they want to get all three? How would they do that?
Yeah, so we always recommend that you go to annualcreditreport.com. Everybody gets their Experian, Equifax, TransUnion credit report for free once per year from annualcreditreport.com. But since COVID, it's actually once per week. So we've just been telling clients to take advantage of that for as long as it persists.
So I think sometimes there are some credit cards also that will give you access to your Experian report. Um, so I would just say that if you got Credit Karma and you got TransUnion and Equifax through that, and you're trying to figure out how to get Experian, I would just Google,
Yeah.
look and see how to get access to your credit cards if you can. And then worst case scenario, I agree, go to annualcreditreport.com. You could possibly even sign up for like a service like LifeLock, which will alert you to material changes to your credit reports. Meaning, if someone's trying to open up credit,
Right.
you know, I'm not a huge fan of that service, but I would rather you had LifeLock than the Experian app.
Right.
So Kendra, I want to say thank you, of course, for sitting with me here today and helping to, kind of digest some of this information and share it with the public. I appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks for having me.